Hello, brothers and sisters. Today we're continuing our study in the book of Ruth, and we're in chapter 3. Now, just to do a recap of the characters that we currently have in chapter 3, we have Naomi. Now, remember, her name means sweet beauty. But at the end of chapter 1, Naomi had told the people of Bethlehem upon her return, "Don't call me Naomi, but call me Mara," which means bitterness. And Naomi also made the statement of that she left Bethlehem full, but she has returned empty. Now, Ruth's name means friendship or friend. And Naomi didn't realize when she said that she returned empty that her daughter in law would actually be the source of joy returning to her. And sometimes we don't realize the source of joy, the source of our completeness is just right at our hand, right beside us. But that is the case that Naomi will come to realize, and Naomi's joy will soon, you will see, be returned to her. Our other character is Boaz, and Boaz's name means strength. Boaz was a very upright man, an honorable man from what we gather in Scripture. Boaz is really a godly figure. He protects Ruth when she comes out into the field to glean in chapter 2. He even has his workers who are harvesting barley at the time to leave some extra on the ground purposefully. So I call that the handfuls of purpose. Do you purposefully bless others, or do you just say, they can receive a blessing from what's left over? Well, Boaz purposefully blessed Ruth and even brought her to the shade tree that they would eat their lunch under and provided her with a meal, even providing her with extra food. So not only was she taking extra grain home to Naomi, her mother-in-law, but she also was taking a little extra food along with her. Boaz also told Ruth in chapter 2 not to go to another field, but to stay at his field where she would be guarded and protected and watched over. So Boaz already was developing a heart for Ruth, but I really feel like, for me personally, chapter 2 is not just that he is kind of having that some enchanted evening moment, looking across the field and saying, there she is. I also believe it is a heart for the situation that Ruth and Naomi found themselves in. Not only being a widow in Naomi's case, but having lost both of her sons, having lost what really would have been Naomi's future. Of course, this is a time period where there was no social security. So your social security, your future security, was found in your offspring, your children, your relatives. But Boaz is that kinsman who can redeem, who can provide security for Naomi and Ruth in the future. So it's about 2 to 3 months have passed as the harvest has been coming in. The harvest has been gathered, and the scene which we will find ourselves in chapter 3 is the final day. The harvest has come in, and now the barley or the wheat is being separated from the chaff. And I was having this discussion with a couple of people the other day, and I think that we live in a very interesting time period that you would pretty much have to roll back the clock to about 50, 75 years ago, where the average person would understand certain pictures that the Bible lays before us. And I say this because I was having to explain this separating the wheat from the chaff, and it came out of the story of where our Lord's walking through the fields of wheat with the disciples on the Sabbath day, and the disciples pick a grain of wheat and roll it in their hands and blow away the chaff and are eating the seeds. I don't know if you've ever done that before. I've done that a few times, but it was from wheat that had grown up from seed that had fallen out of the bird feeder. Even today, I have a few heads of wheat that are right underneath my bird feeder. And it's kind of fun to do that, to pick that once it started to dry and roll it in your hand and blow away the chaff and to eat those kernels. Just to think this was days gone by. This was a common practice for people. But today you have to explain a little bit more of that story, because the average person, at least in our Western culture, hasn't experienced that. They don't know what the harvest is like. They aren't really familiar with the threshing floor. In Nigeria, next to my house, just about 30 yards from my house, was a flattened rock that villagers would bring grain to and let it dry, and then they would pull it all together and beat it with sticks. And once they would beat it with sticks to knock the seed out of the pod, then they would gather it up and start sifting it out, throwing it up in the air and letting the wind blow the chaff away. I really don't have allergies, but when they would start doing that, it was with the grain called acha, and I would sneeze almost. It seemed like nonstop for a month. and I could tell when the village further away was doing it, because as the wind would blow in our direction, I would know that the acha harvest had begun. But in this picture, the harvest, as it says, come to an end. Ruth's job, her ability to go and glean the field, it's over. So she has no need for returning. Let's look at Ruth chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you were? Behold, he widows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do." She said to her, "All that you say I will do." Ruth's heeding her mother-in-law's instructions. Let's look at a few points here. First, Naomi says to Ruth, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you?" I think this is a real shift. Shows us the change in Naomi's heart. I think that all of a sudden Ruth has gone from being her daughter-in-law to being her daughter. She's gone from maybe a little bit of Ruth being like, "Why are you, a Moabitess, coming back to Bethlehem with me? Why are you traveling with me? You're going to bring me shame, maybe. You're going to bring attention when we enter back into Jewish culture that my sons married Moabite women not of our faith." But maybe I'm reading a little bit more into that, but I think that we see a real shift here. Naomi isn't saying to Ruth for Ruth to seek security for her, but saying, "Shall I not seek security for you? Shall I not help you, Ruth, have a future?" Are we concerned about others' futures, or are we just concerned about our own future? I think that that's something we should note. But Ruth's mother-in-law here now has a concern for Ruth. What will become of Ruth? And then, as Boaz and I were kinsmen, I touched on this just a little bit with chapter 2. The kinsman's the only one who could redeem them, their nearest kinsman. We're going to find out a little bit more about that at the end of chapter 3 here. But Boaz is this man of strength, this man of integrity. He can rescue them from a life of poverty, rescue them from a life of unknown, rescue them from a life of insecurity, and give them security. Now, in verse 3, we have, wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself. Of course, during this time period, they would have had oils to, cover up body odor, if you will, to purify themselves in a sense. But here we have, put on your best clothes. In Hebrew, it actually just says, if we were giving a literal translation, it says, put on clothes. Now, it's not that Ruth was going around naked, but it's that, remember, Ruth and Naomi have been in a state of mourning. You think of, in times past, a widow would put on a black dress, wear a black veil oftentimes when they would go out in public or just even around the house. Most people would do this for a certain length of time. There's other widows in times past that wore black the rest of their lives after their husbands had passed away. So I believe that here Ruth was still in those mourning clothes, those clothes of despair, if you will. And now Naomi is saying to Ruth, it's time to stop that. It's time to move forward. And I also think that one of the things that's happened here is we know in chapter 2 that Boaz had this interest. We don't know necessarily if it was set on marriage at first, but we know that he had a soft place in his heart for Ruth and for Naomi. And maybe these two women had been waiting. Maybe Naomi had been waiting and waiting and waiting for Boaz to move, and he wasn't. And so now it's time to take some steps. And this step is, hey, go down to the threshing floor tonight. He'll be there. He's going to be guarding his grain. And that's important to remember. This is during the time of the Judges. And as we go through the book of Judges, which we're getting ready to start here soon, as we look through the book of Judges, you'll see there's a number of times, primarily you think of the story of Gideon, when Gideon is threshing out his wheat, beating the wheat and the chaff, separating it. He's doing it down in a wine press, hiding from the enemy who would come and attack at the time of harvest. So time and time again throughout the book of Judges, the enemy, they wouldn't come when the wheat was still in the field. They waited until it had been harvested. They waited until the work had been done. So that's one reason why you're going to find Boaz camping out, if you will, with the harvest that evening. Instead of going home, they're there to protect it. But it's also a time of celebration. The harvest is in, the work's over. So they're eating and they're drinking. And in a sense, Naomi's saying to Ruth, don't interrupt their celebration. Wait until they're full. Wait until they're happy. And then see where Boaz goes to lie down. And sneak over, in a sense. And it's kind of scandalous, I know, but it's the custom of this time period. Uncover his feet and lie down at him. Now, we're going to see here as we go a little bit further, this doesn't take Boaz, this isn't a surprise to him in the sense of what happens. It's just a shocking, who is it at my feet? And I believe that that's because it would have been familiar with them, that custom, that rite, what was taking place in this setting. Also, do note Ruth's obedience to Naomi's wisdom. Naomi knows the customs of her people. She knows the law. And Ruth says, all that you say, I will do. Verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, doesn't mean he was drunk, but his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and laid down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, Who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. Now, this word cover actually, if we go back to where they first meet, and Boaz speaks of, may the Lord cover you, may the Lord's wings cover you. That's the same wording, the same mindset used here. Spread your covering, spread your wing, put your protection over me. Basically, Ruth's proposing to Boaz. She's saying, I want to be your wife. Let's see what Boaz's response is here. Then he said, May you be blessed, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. So we don't know how much older Boaz was, but we do have a couple of clues that he was a bit older. And Boaz is saying, you've shown kindness. And he says, not only to the last, your last kindness is better than the first. The first kindness would have been that Ruth honored her husband and Naomi both by saying, I'm going to stay with you, Naomi, and your people are my people. You know, that's that mindset of that the two have become one. And so Ruth's family was Boaz's family. And she had honored her husband that way. She had honored Naomi by staying with Naomi. So this Boaz is recognized. Boaz knows the reputation of Ruth. But he also says, you've been kind to me. To even desire this, to desire to come under my protection. He points out she could have gone after other people, but she's come to him. Maybe there would have been others willing to marry Ruth, to bring her into their home. Verse 11. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. For all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence, a woman of virtue, upright, pure. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Ooh, now this is when it starts to, there's somebody else who could redeem you. Somebody else who could end up with all of the land of Elimelech, your father-in-law. Because that kinsman-redeemer would come in, and he wouldn't just be protecting them. He wouldn't be just allowing Ruth's husband's name to continue in the first offspring, but he would also obtain the land and have that land to farm, to take care of, until that child had become of age to take on his father's land. Now, I have to back up here. With that, the kinsman-redeemer, the first offspring, some would say any offspring. I think that there's commentaries kind of go back and forth with that. At least the first male offspring, should Ruth and Boaz have children, that first male offspring would be the inheritor of Elimelech's fortune as redeemed by this kinsman-redeemer. So the kinsman-redeemer, if he buys the land, he doesn't even get to keep it. He doesn't get to do anything with it because it's all going to go to this child that would be born. So just keep in mind, it's showing here that Boaz, he has a heart for Ruth, and he has a heart of integrity. He also has his sense of biblical responsibility for taking care of his relatives. So remember, as I've said, God has a plan for the widow, for the orphan, for the destitute. We only need to operate within God's plan, and these individuals would be taken care of. And that's what really makes this book so wonderful, is we see God's plan for taking care of those in need being played out. Verse 13, remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good. Let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. So she laid at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Again he said, give me the cloak that is on you, and hold it. So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. Now, I want to point this out. Boaz is also protecting Ruth here. It would have been very uncommon for Ruth to have been out wandering the city at night. It would have looked very strange to have seen this lone woman going back into the town as the sun's rising. So I think that it's not that Boaz is protecting himself, but he wants to protect Ruth's integrity. He wants to protect her reputation. And in sending her back with this grain, should she be stopped, should somebody question, they're going to say, oh, well, she has a lot of grain. She was given this. So Boaz is really big on guard here. Now, we don't know exactly how much these 6 measures would have added up to. Some say that would have been somewhere between 40 and 50 pounds. So that's a lot of weight to be carrying back home. It's a great blessing. That would be a lot of grain at that time period. A lot of grain that she could sell to make money to provide for her and Naomi that much longer. But he also tells her, don't fear, that he will take care of it that day. So he's serious. He's ready to move on this. Verse 16. When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her. Now, again, this is a place I'll point out the translation here. It really should read, when she came, her mother-in-law says, who is it? Or what is your name? In a sense, say, are you Ruth, my daughter-in-law, or are you Ruth Boaz? Are you Mrs. Boaz? How did it go? In a sense, that's what it is. It's not that she doesn't recognize Ruth, but she wants to know, are things going well? Did you come back to me as Miss Boaz? Verse 17, she said, these 6 measures of barley he gave me, for he said, do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then she said, "Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest until he has settled it today." So Naomi knows Boaz is not going to wait. He's now serious. This is going to move forward. So Boaz is protecting Ruth. He wants to make sure that she maintains her integrity. Boaz sees her heart. And he's ready to take her as his bride. But there's one that stands in the way. What will happen? Well, come back for chapter 4 and we'll see. Till then, God bless.